Hey, good morning and welcome. Stop laughing, man. I got to preach. Welcome to week 1 of How to Be Richer. Not how to be rich or how to be the richest. No, the conversation we're going to have today in the next several weeks is how to be richer. Because come on now, church, let's be honest. The one thing every single one of us in here probably has in common is that we all want to be just a little bit richer, right? And I know we're not going to say it out loud because it doesn't sound very spiritual, and it makes us feel kind of shallow and materialistic, but it doesn't really matter where you live, how educated you are, how you vote. The one thing maybe most of us have in common in here is that we all want to be just a little bit richer, right? We want to be a little bit richer today than we were yesterday. Right, we want to be a little bit richer tomorrow than we are today. We are hoping that in 2022, we're a little bit richer than we were in 2021. When we're in our 30s, we're hoping we're a little bit richer than we were when we were in our 20s. When we were in our 40s, we're like, God, please, I hope I'm a little bit richer than I was when I was in my 30s. When you're in your 50s, oh, man, please, God, hopefully I am richer in my 50s than I was in my 40s, in my 30s, and in my 20s. We want to be a little bit richer than our parents. Right? Maybe a little bit richer than our neighbors, a little bit richer than your coworker, a little bit richer than that person that you graduated high school with. You want to be a little bit richer than you were when you were single, a little bit richer than you were when you were in college. You want to be a little bit richer now that you love Jesus and are doing things the right way more than you were when you didn't love Jesus and were doing things the wrong way. I'm sorry if I just said all that out loud, because I know those are the things that most of us think, but we don't want to say. Right? Because again, it doesn't sound or feel very spiritual, and so we bury these desires on the inside. But the truth, again, is that most of us in here, if we are honest, and you can put it in whatever spiritual language you want to couch it in, the reality is we want more for our future than we have in the current season. Okay, I've never met somebody that's like, you know what, I hope 20 years from now, I have way less than I have now in my life. Right? Every one of us want just a little bit more in our future. And the good news that we're going to be talking about this morning, just so you guys know where this plane is headed before we take off, because some of you are like, I'm about to put the eject button right now and get out the exit because I know where this guy is going. The good news is that God is not opposed to that. Okay, I'm going to say it again because I ain't scared. The God of the Bible, believe it or not, is not opposed to you wanting more for your future and for your life than you have now. So if you've been carrying that for a while and felt like you didn't know what to do with it, well, I'm letting you know right now that as we're about to see in the scriptures, Jesus doesn't have a problem with you wanting a little bit more for your life than you have now. You know how I know that? Somebody asked me how I know that. Somebody, how do I know that? Thank you. That was a good one. I don't know who said that over there, but I like that. Keep that energy up. I know that God doesn't have a problem with us wanting more for our future than we have now, because if he did, he wouldn't tell us how. Right? I bet you didn't see that coming, right? Right? I bet some of you guys, maybe online or in the room, thought, oh, this is one of the sermons where the pastor or the church wants something from us. I bet you didn't see it coming, that this is not about us wanting something from you. This is about God wanting something for you. Right? I bet some of you didn't even know that Jesus actually tells us, like literally, we're about to see in a second, Jesus tells you how to have more in your future than you have now. Matthew chapter 6 is not our anchor text for the day, but I just want to show you so you don't think I'm making this up. Listen to what the writer says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. If you have a Bible, you'll notice the words are in red. Right, the reason the words are in red, it's not red on the screen, is because the writer wants you to know this is not Peter, this is not John, this is Jesus himself speaking. Listen to what Jesus says. He says, don't store up for yourselves treasures, period. No, that's not what he said. He says, don't store up treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But, he says in verse 20, store up treasures for yourselves in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. About a year ago, I called my buddy Joel. because he knew a lot about crypto, and I wanted to get into crypto. Anybody into crypto here? Anybody? Yeah, some of you guys are like, yeah, you know, I don't know if I want to let people know. I didn't know. I want to get into it because everybody apparently is into crypto, and that Matt Damon commercial was pretty convincing, okay? So anybody seen that? It's like, fortune favors the bold. And I'm like, oh, man, I'm sitting here eating ice cream in my underwear. I want some of that, right? So I want to invest in the crypto. So I called my buddy Joel because I didn't know. So I was like, hey, Joel, man, like where do I start? And he's like, download this app. So I downloaded it, and I called him up, and he's going on, and he might as well have been speaking a different language because I had no idea what he was talking about. And so finally, I let him go on for about 10 minutes, and then I channeled my inner Michael Scott. I was like, Joel, why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5, right? And he did. He's like, you see these 3 over here? Don't touch it. Right, because it's volatile, it's not secure, and the arrow is pointing down. Arrow pointing down is bad. Do you understand that? I'm like, I understand that. And he's like, but then you see these 3 over there? These 3 are secure. These 3 are great. Arrow pointing up. You understand arrow pointing up? I'm like, I understand that. He's like, okay, so that's all you need to know, right? Hashtag this is not financial advice, right? That's what everybody says when they give you advice about crypto and stock. They want you to make sure that you know. But he's like, hey, don't invest in these 3. If you want to invest, look at this 3. Jesus says, this is amazing, okay? This is something that I never heard growing up in church. Jesus literally is saying, hey, don't invest here. Because if you invest here, the arrow is pointing down. You're going to lose it all. But if you want security, if you want gain, if you want more than you invested, then invest here. Are you guys seeing this? Or does that change anything for anybody? Literally, Jesus is saying, hey, the problem is not that you want more for your future. The problem is where you're investing for the more for your future. So Jesus says, hey, don't invest on earth, because here's what's going to happen if you invest here, but I want you to invest over here. Let me read you one more verse so you don't think I'm cherry picking before we go to our anchor verse. Listen to what Paul says. Paul writes this letter to his friend Tim, and listen to what Paul says in Timothy, I was going to say 1 Tim. That just sounds weird. 1 Timothy chapter number 6, verse 17 to 19. Listen to what it says. It says, tell those who are rich in this world's wealth, which is all of us, by the way. That's a different sermon. I know most of you think I'm not rich, but trust me, from the perspective of most of the world, you are filthy rich. But it says, tell those in this world's wealth to quit being so full of themselves and so obsessed with money, which is here today and gone tomorrow. And then he says this. He says, tell them to go after God, who wants everything that you've ever had, and he wants to leave you with nothing. Wah, wah, you know? Like, I knew that's where you're going, preacher, man. No. He says, tell them to go after God, who what? Piles on the riches we could ever manage, to do good, to be rich in helping others, to be extravagantly generous. We're going to talk about that in a couple weeks. If they do that, listen to what it says. It says they'll build a treasury that will last, gaining life that is truly life. So in Matthew 6, Jesus says, man, you want treasures, man, here's how to do it. And then Paul comes and he says the exact same thing. I love the way the Message paraphrase put in Matthew. I don't think we have it on the screen. In Matthew chapter 6 paraphrase, Eugene Peterson says this. He says, I want you to stockpile treasures in heaven. Isn't that crazy? That's in the Bible. Jesus is like, I want you to stockpile treasures as much as you can. Do you guys remember a couple years ago when we were stockpiling toilet paper? Anybody remember this? When Auntie Rona first came around and everyone's stockpiling. You know, you're telling your kids you can only go to the bathroom 2 times a day, okay? Seriously. Right now, I was like, I got to go. I'm like, sorry. Okay, I can buy detergent. I can buy you new clothes if you go in your underwear, but I can't buy toilet paper. Right, we're stockpiling. Remember several years ago when we were stockpiling water? Anybody remember this? When there was a water crisis, I was cleaning my basement literally yesterday, and I opened this closet. We haven't opened in a while. There's water. I'm like, why do we have all this water? Because we were stockpiling. I mean, it's the closest this is the truth. It's the closest I've ever come to, like, you know, maybe what a drug deal would be like. I remember that time pulling a parking lot. My buddy Andy's like, I got 2 cases of water. I'm like, dude, done. You know, like, meet me in the parking lot, start high school, right? You know, make sure there's a lookout. I told my wife, I'm not back in an hour. Call 911, right? I mean, we backed our trunk. I opened my Jeep, put the water in there, and I just took off, you know? The writer says, I want you to stockpile treasures. And I know this sounds kind of crazy. I promise I'm going somewhere with this, but is it possible, church? Is it possible that the problem is not that most of us want more for our future? Right? Is it possible that the real problem is not that you want treasures for yourself in the future? Is it possible that the problem is where or how you go about that treasure? Right? Is it possible that God is not trying to give you less for your future, but God's actually trying to show you the best way for you to have more in your future? Luke chapter 12 is our anchor text for today, man. It is absolutely amazing, and I hope that God uses it to speak to you today. Just quick context before we read it in Luke chapter 12. Jesus is at a point in his ministry right now where he's so popular and so many crowds are coming to see him that the writer says, and this is not on the screen, earlier in Luke chapter 12, that people were trampling each other to get to Jesus. Okay, so you guys remember way back in the olden days when, you would, Friday night of Black Friday, you would turn the news on and you would see the grainy videos of all those people who trampled each other to get into Walmart to save $29 on a flat screen TV. Anybody remember that? I know that was none of you guys because you guys are all better than that, right? But you remember how people would go and they would sit outside in the cold for like 6 hours to save like $6, and the door would open and they would like literally be trampling on each other and fighting to get. The writer tells us that Jesus got to a point in his ministry, it literally said the people were trampling each other to get to him. And it says in Luke chapter 12 that while all this crowd gathered around him, Jesus was having a conversation with his disciples. And this is so amazing. In the middle of his conversations, the Bible says this. It says a man yelled out and interrupted him. Right? You ready for this? Luke chapter 12, verse 13. Someone in the crowd, let's call him Tony, yelled out and said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." I read this like 6 months ago, and I wrote in my Bible, "Yikes, how awkward." Shifty eye emoji. I'm serious. Look, Jenna, it's right there. Do you see it? Is that real? I drew it. Yeah, I did. How awkward. Let me put in perspective for you. You're like, why did you call the guy Tony? Tony Joel, are you up there somewhere? I know Tony's over there. Tony's over there. Hey, everybody wave to Tony. Say hi. Everybody say hi, Tony. Tony's back there. Great family, Tony and Angie. Tony has 2 brothers. I don't think Joe is here today. Steven's not here today. But they're great. They're part of our church. Are they any of your brothers here today? You don't think so? All right, because you're better than them, right? Way more spiritual. Right on. Hey. Hey, Tony. Yeah. Hashtag Tony's better than you. Okay, can you imagine for a second if in the middle of my sermon, like I'm preaching, like God's moving, I'm like, I got something important to share. Tony over there gets up and he interrupts and he yells like, "Sammy." His brother did that once, by the way, a year ago. I don't know if you guys were here. Like I was preaching, right? Joe, his brother, came up and took the mic from me. I'm like, this is weird. And it was incredible because he encouraged me and I cried. It was amazing. But imagine if Tony interrupted me, and I said, "What's up?" He's like, "Hey, Sammy, I need you to tell my brother, give my stuff back." I'm like, "What?" In the middle of summer, he's like, "Tell him to give my stuff." You know Joe, right? I'm like, "Yeah, I know Joe." He's like, "Yeah, Joe's got my stuff, and he's not giving it back to me, and you're a pastor, and so I figured if you tell Joe to give my stuff back, then maybe he'll give my stuff back. So tell him to give my stuff back. I want my stuff back." Can you tell him to give my stuff back, please, preacher man? I know you got something to say, but tell him to give my stuff back. I mean, we're laughing, but that's what happened. Jesus is preaching. Can you feel this moment? Random dude yells in the crowd, "Hey, teacher, tell my brother to give my stuff back." To which Jesus replies, "Man." He did. That's scripture. "Man." Another translation is, "Bruv, come on, man. Who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you? What do you think I am, Dr. Phil? Judge Mathis? What's going on here? I'm trying to preach here, man." He says, "Tell my brother to give my stuff." Jesus says, "Man, who appointed me a judge, an arbiter between us?" Then get this. Jesus said to them. Okay, if you got a Bible, I want you to underline the word "them" because this is critical. I'm going to tell you why in a little bit. Jesus said to them, he said this. He says, "Watch out and be on guard." So guy interrupts, says, hey, tell him to give my stuff back. Jesus doesn't just address Tony. Jesus looks at the whole crowd and he says, hey, I want you to watch out and I want you to be on guard. Right, about 5 years ago, my wife and I, we went to Mexico on vacation without our kids. Sorry, just a moment of silence because it's been a long time since we've done that. I miss it. Okay, I love my kids, but... And I don't know if you remember this, but I remember when we got to Mexico, I don't know if every airport's like this, but we got to Mexico, and all these people just came at us, and they were like trying to help us. I'm like, this is great. This is the most helpful airport in the world. I'm like, I pick you to help me. And so we go to the side and trying to help us, and next thing I know, they're trying to sell me a timeshare. I was like, what is going on? And I remember the travel agent told us, he said, hey, you got to be careful. You got to watch out. When you come out of the place, all of these people are going to come at you, but they're not there to help you. They're there to get something from you. So you got to watch. You got to keep guard, and you got to just plow through the crowd. The same thing when we went to Haiti 12 years ago with college students, right? I told them what the guy that was leading us told us. Say, hey, you got to be careful. You got to watch out. Jesus takes the moment from Tony and he looks at the whole crowd. And what does Jesus say? Jesus says this, I want you to watch out and be on guard against all kinds of greed. I heard a pastor say something about a decade ago that I've never been able to forget. He said, greed is the hardest thing to see in the mirror. Would you guys believe me if I told you, this is true, that in almost 15 I don't know how many years that I've been in ministry, working with people and meeting with people and talking about all their struggles, I have never sat down with somebody at coffee who said, Sammy, man, I got a problem, man, and it's greed. Not one. Like, I've sat down with people who told me, man, I got a big problem with lust. I got this big sexual addiction. I've talked to people who told me, man, I'm a compulsive liar. I can't stop lying. Right, I met with a guy that's probably the closest, who told me I have a gambling problem. I've blown like $100K online. I'm in crazy debt right now. Can you help me? I've even met with people who told me, man, I have cheated on my spouse and I don't know what to do. But not once have I ever had a conversation with somebody who told me that they had a problem with the one thing that Jesus tells us in this passage to be on guard against. Jesus says, I want you to watch out, and I want you to be on guard, and then listen to what it says, against all, say it with me, kinds of greed. 4 months ago, I took my girls, I put them in the van. I'm like, it was impromptu, spontaneous. I'm like, I know it's bedtime, but we got to go somewhere. Get in the van. They're like, where are we going? I'm like, we're going to the house of worship. And now, why? I'm like, because God's good, all right? And we got to worship. So I put them in the van, and they're like, okay, life of a PK, 12 minutes later, we pull into the house of worship. All right, and I'll never forget what Nora said. I think she had tears in her eyes. Maybe not. Maybe I just like to imagine she did. She's like, Daddy, I thought there was only one kind. I didn't know there were these many kinds of donuts at Krispy Kreme. I'm like, there are. That's why we're here. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about when I say it's a house of worship. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And you don't believe in God, you go to Krispy Kreme, I promise you, you will be saved right on the spot, right? And it's perfect in our town because it's Krispy Kreme, Chick-fil-A, QQ, right there in a triangle. It's a holy triangle, And it blew her mind. She's like, all this time, she thought all there was just the glazed, because that's all we bought. And the glaze is amazing. It's the OG, man. Don't get better than that. But she's like, I can't believe it. And I went online, just so you don't think I'm making this up. I'm just going to read it to you, the different kinds of donuts that they have at Krispy Kreme. They got a mini chocolate glazed peanut butter donut. That's right. Feel free to say amen, right on, hallelujah, whatever you want to do. They got mini chocolate glazed cookies and cream, mini chocolate glazed cake batter, glazed raspberry-filled Reese's Classic Donut, chocolate ice glazed Oreo cookies and cream. Come on, somebody testify. Glazed lemon-filled strawberry ice with sprinkled New York cheesecake, powdered cinnamon cake. I didn't even make it through a quarter of the page. They had all kinds. Question: why did Jesus say to watch out against all kinds of greed? Why didn't he just say, watch out for greed? Why? Why? Ask yourself that. Why? Why did Jesus go out of his way to say, hey, I want you to watch out against all kinds of greed? Here's what I think. I think the reason Jesus said that, part of the reason at least, one is because I think Jesus knew that it's really hard to see greed in the mirror. And maybe more importantly, I think Jesus knew that the reason it's hard to see greed in the mirror, don't miss this, is because most of us have believed the lie that there's only one kind of greed. Right? I think the reason the reason it's hard to see greed in the mirror is because we believe there's only one kind of greed, and it's the rich people kind of greed, right? I think the reason most of us don't see greed in the mirror is because when we hear the word greed, we think, well, that's a rich people problem. Right? Greed is like, Oprah, like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Floyd Mayweather. Oh, yeah, that guy. You've seen his pictures on Instagram, he's in a bathtub full with cash, right? He obviously has a greed problem. But what Jesus is trying to show them and what Jesus is trying to show us here today is that greed is not partial to your socioeconomic status. Okay, greed doesn't care if you have $1 or $1 million. Greed is coming for you. And so Jesus says, I want you to watch out and I want you to be on guard. And I think it's interesting, and this was the word I told you to underline earlier, that it says in verse 15, if you could throw that up there. It says, then Jesus said to who? Them. Not just to Tony, who's like, get my stuff back. Do you know who them is in this passage? Them is not Floyd Mayweather and his friends. Them is farmers and fishermen. Them is the guy who just worked 3 shifts at McDonald's and still got the apron on. Smells like French fries, sitting in the front row listening to Jesus. Them is the guy who makes minimum wage. Them goes across all socioeconomic ranges, the whole entire scope. Jesus looked at all of them, every single person, and he says, I want all of you to watch. Be on guard. Watch against greed. I don't know who said this, so I'll give him credit, but I saw this definition. I thought it was so good. It says, greed is the nagging sense that we never have enough and we need more. Greed is this insatiable desire and lust for more stuff. Heard a pastor say once that what lust is to sexuality, greed is to materialism. Jesus says, I want you to watch for this. I want you to watch out for that voice that's always whispering in your ear that what you have is not enough. I want you to watch out for that thing inside of you that makes you feel that contentment is just beyond your reach. Right, you guys remember when we were kids and you'd play that I'm not touching you game, trying to get as close to your, to Jenna's face as possible, right? I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. That's what greed does inside of us. Greed makes us feel like contentment is just right there. If I could just get to it. If I could just have that next thing and that car, the house, that promotion, those clothes, whatever it is, the stuff that you've bought into the lie of greed makes us think that we are so close. And Jesus is saying here, I want you to watch for that. And I want you to be on guard against all kinds of greed. And then he says this. He says, for life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Underline the word life if you have a Bible with you, because it is our reminder today. And for the rest of this conversation, for the next several weeks, we're going to talk about some really, really hard things. But I just want you to remember, every time this conversation feels hard, I want you to remember the word life. Like, I want you to remember, because this is Jesus' way of reminding us that the reason he's anti-greed is because he is pro-life. Right? The reason Jesus is talking the way he's talking is not because Jesus wants less from you. No, Jesus is saying this because he wants more for you. Jesus is saying this, but he actually wants to give you life. Let's go back again to what Paul says in Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. He says this. He says, tell those who are rich in this world, quit being so full of themselves. Don't be obsessed with money. Here today, gone tomorrow. Tell them to go after God, who piles on all the riches we could have, man, to do good, to be rich in helping others, generous. If they do that, he says, they will build a treasury that will last, gaining, and here's that word again, life. That is truly what? Life. And so we see Paul here making the same invitation that Jesus is making. And that invitation is what? Life. What Jesus and Paul are trying to expose is what I would say is maybe one of the best-selling lies of our culture. More stuff equals more life. And I know we would never say that we believe that, but come on now. More stuff, more life. Man, if I could just get that thing, and like you said, more money and more stuff, whatever it is that you can put in the fill in the blanks, I think a lot of us have bought into the lie that if I just get that, man, then I will be finally happy, and I'll have peace, and I'll have joy, and I'll have security. And Paul say, no, there's a better way. There's a different way. If what you're looking for is actually life, what you're pursuing is not going to lead to life. It's only going to lead to more death. Right? And I think if we're honest, all of us have experienced that to some capacity. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here, but come on now. Can you think of the last time? Okay, you can answer just for yourself. Think of the last time that you really wanted something, right? And you're just convinced that, man, once I get that, man, it's going to feel so good. And then you get it. And then you experience that tiny bit of disappointment in your heart. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I can remember when I got my Jeep, man, I was so excited. I was like, I couldn't sleep for like days. So it's going to be awesome. I'm going to get it, and I'm just going to feel amazing. And then I got it, and I felt the same, except a little broker. I was like, you guys know what I'm talking about. There's that gap that exists. There's that gap that a lot of us prefer to ignore. And what we're going to see today in the next several weeks is the Bible continues to point and expose that gap. And God is calling us to a different way. He's calling us to reject the best-selling lie of our culture that more stuff equals more life. And he's saying, no, if you want life, life is found in Jesus. And that's not cliche. That's not, church talk or preacher hype or whatever. No, that is the reality, that in the path of Jesus, we actually get more life. I want to read verse 15 again. He says, then he said to them, watch out. I want you to be on your guard, Jesus says, against all kinds of greed. Why? Because life does not consist in an abundance of possession. More stuff does not equal more life. I don't know how many people are in the room today or are watching who you would say that, man, I don't know if I, really fully believe all of this God stuff, and I'm not sure if I believe the Bible, if Jesus actually existed and said those things. If that is you, man, you might want to lean in, because I think you're going to love this part. Right, about 6 months ago, we started preparing for this conversation, and I started looking through Scripture and what does the Bible actually have to say about stuff and treasures and possessions and me and this desire that I have to want more for my future. What does the Bible have to say? And I saw some amazing things. But what blew my mind the most was the amount of secular research that comes to the same conclusion that Jesus came to. Okay, so if you're like, I don't know if I'll believe Jesus, maybe you'll believe the secular research that comes to the same conclusion. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there's a well-known study in 2010 that was conducted, I think, by Princeton University. These two guys, Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton. What a name, Angus, right? And they found this. This is a great study. You can look it up when you get home. They found that people tend to feel happier the more money they make, to a point. Right, so the conversation is not like, hey, man, doesn't really matter how much I know. They're like, hey, they studied it, the secular research, and they're like, yeah, the more money people make, they actually get a little bit happier, but up to a point. And when this study was conducted, that point, they said, was about $75,000 a year for a family of four. So they're like, they followed all of these families and charted all of these, polls and conversations. And they're like, we found that up to about $75,000, a family of four, happiness actually goes up, because then you can actually pay your bills and you can, maintain a lifestyle. You can get food and all the things that you need to survive. Happiness goes up. And then they said this, at that point, it kind of levels off. Okay, so I'm going to say it again. Happiness goes up. Research shows until you reach about $75,000, every year you feel more content and more happy. And research shows that once you hit that, there's a flattening of the curve for a while. And then the data suggests that happiness starts to decline. Okay, and I know that, that this is just research, and it doesn't speak for everybody, and there's always exceptions and anomalies, and it's not perfect, and implicit bias, and I get all of that stuff. But I just think it's so fascinating that people are studying this, right? I mean, I was up way too late last night reading articles I couldn't understand because it just blew my mind that some of the smartest minds of our day, they're studying this, and they're coming to the same conclusion that Jesus came to. They're like, more stuff does not equal more life. So again, Jesus is not opposed to us wanting more for our lives. What Jesus is opposed to, as we're going to see in this conversation, is the lie that more stuff equals more life. Saw this quote last night as I was just kind of reading some research by Gary Vee. Some of you guys know Gary Vee. Listen to what he says. He says, I have an uncomfortable number of friends who make $12 million a year and are unhappy. I know some of you guys are thinking, you think that would be nice. I would like to make $12 million and be unhappy. But the point that he's making, and this was a guy that came from nothing and now is a millionaire himself, but the point he's making is the same point that Jesus made, that more stuff does not equals more life. Or to put it a different way, I guess what we're all finding out is that the great theologian, Notorious B.I.G. was right after all. More money, say it with me, more problems. Someone said more, it's more. More money. That's a sermon title, by the way. They always ask me, what's your sermon title? Biggie Was Right. That's my sermon title. You can just make it that. Biggie was right, and so was Jesus, and so is all of the research that you can find. But you don't have to take my word for it, right? Maybe there's just someone in the room, someone online, and you're thinking to yourself, you're like, I don't know if I buy that, man. Maybe you don't want to take my word for it to come out, pastor. Right? Maybe you don't want to take the word of Jesus because he's a first century teacher, and what does he know about my life now? Maybe you don't want to take the word of all the secular research that comes to the same conclusion because you're like, those guys are kind of biased. Maybe you don't want to take Biggie's word for it because he's rich. Well, here's my question for you. Would you take your word for it? Right? Do you believe you? Do you believe all the evidence in your life up to this point that overwhelmingly suggests to you that more stuff has never given you more life? If anything, the research and what Jesus shows and what your life experience shows is that for a lot of us, if we're honest, more stuff has actually led to less of the things that we actually want. More stuff has actually led us to less happiness and less joy and less contentment. And again, please don't miss the point. I'm not saying that having stuff is bad. I'm not saying you shouldn't want stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to expose the lie that a lot of us have believed. That if I could just get more stuff, man, I'll get more life. And Jesus in Matthew 6, Jesus in Luke 12, Paul in 1 Timothy 6, and all through scriptures, as we're going to see in the next several weeks, continually invites us to life. Jesus is like, I don't have a problem with you wanting more. I want you to have more. Jesus wants you to have more than you want to have more. You want to be richer? Jesus is like, great. I want you to be richer. The problem is not that you want to be richer. The problem is that you think being rich means one thing, but being rich actually means something completely different. Let me read you the rest of the story. The words aren't up on the screen. But after Jesus tells them to watch, he tells them this parable. Listen to this. Jesus tells them this parable. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Parables are short stories meant to illustrate a spiritual point. And so Jesus made up this man. He's like, there's this guy, man. He's rich. So he thought to himself, man, what am I going to do with all this money? I know. I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tear down my barns. I'm going to build bigger ones. He says, then I will store all my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. So take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Right? Isn't that the American dream? You got enough. You got to worry about anything. So let's just chill and enjoy life. God is good. # blessed. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And then Jesus says this and drops the mic. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves. But, again, the problem is not that you're storing up for yourself. It's where and how. This is how it would be for anyone who stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Problem is not that you want to be rich or richer. Problem is that Jesus redefines what it means to be rich. And Jesus steps in the first century and in 2022, right dab in the middle again of the best-selling lie of our culture. And he says, there is a better way. There's a better way. And it actually leads to more life than you could ever imagine, not just for you, but for the people you love and for your family. If your answer, this is my answer reading the scripture, is yes, I want that. If you're here going, man, I want, if you're tired of the life that doesn't deliver, if you're like, man, I want more. Like, I want the life that Paul says is actually truly life, the life that delivers. I'm tired of chasing, always feeling like happiness is beyond my reach if I could just have whatever the next stuff is. The good news we're going to talk about through this whole series, that it is actually possible, regardless of where you are, regardless of your socioeconomic status, to do it a different way. And so in this series, we're going to be talking about 3 steps to actually be richer, according to Jesus. Step number 1, you got to watch out and be on guard against greed. If you want to be actually rich in the things that matter, if you want life that's truly life, step number 1, I told you, it's 3 not so easy steps. Step number 1 is that you have to watch out and be on guard against all kinds of greed, or to put it a different way, you got to reject the lie that more stuff equals more happiness. That's step number 1. Step number 2, you got to come back next week for step number 2. I got a question for you guys to think through, and then we'll be out of here. I want you to give you a little homework. You don't have to share this with anybody. You can if you want to. It's just between you and God, between you and you. Maybe you and your spouse or significant other or friend if you want to, but try and answer this question. If only I had blank, I would be blank. Every single one of us in here probably walked in the door today with a bunch of if-onlys. Right? And again, we're going to talk about the next several weeks, and it's going to be practical, and we're going to invite God to change our hearts. And I'm telling you, man, I'm not exaggerating. There's so much at stake. There are decisions that we're going to make in the next several weeks that I truly believe will not only change our future, but potentially will change the future of generations to come. That your children and your children's children will live a different, better, fuller life because of decisions that you make in the next several weeks. But before we get there, we have to start here. Right? Before we get there, we have to start here where we expose all the areas that we have let greed sip into our hearts. And I think, again, all of us in here have a bunch of if-onlys that we've been carrying for a long time. And I just want to invite you this morning to just take a minute to just try and expose that. What are those things that you've thought to yourself, if I only had blank, I would be happy, more content, less anxious, more joyful, more thankful? What are those things? What are those material things that you have believed would lead you to happiness? What are those things that you felt an insatiable desire for? I wrote a few examples in here. Some are general, some are from my life. Maybe some of these relate to some of you, I don't know. But if you ever felt like, man, my house just isn't big enough, man, if I could just get a bigger, nicer house, man, a nicer apartment, man, I would be fill in the blank. Shoes, Sammy, clothes, bathrooms are nice enough. If I could just get a bigger yard, if I get a newer car, right? I got a PS4 now. There's a new PS5. What about the PS6? I go to Best Buy. Every time I go to Best Buy, I'm like, my TV is not big enough. I got to upgrade my computer. My new phone's not new enough. There's all kinds of greed, and we all have just bought into this cycle that if we could just get a hold of those things, that our lives would be better. And I just want to give you a minute, and those of you who are online too, to do the same thing, to just kind of fill that up, and then Aaron's going to be up to close us. I want to give you the gift this morning of exposing some of the areas that maybe greed has sipped into your heart. Jesus, thank you for inviting us to new life. Thank you for inviting us to be a part of something that's bigger than us. And so we just ask in the next few minutes before we get out of here that you give us the courage, just expose all the areas that greed has seeped into our hearts. And I just pray this week that as we go about our day, God, that you would just help us to see all the ways that we've bought into the cycle of more stuff equals more life. We're thankful for the stuff that you've given us. We don't feel bad for it, God, but we don't want to put our hope in it. And so I just pray that you would expose that. And I pray that you give us the courage on this journey to take every step that you call us to take. And I pray, God, I know it's a big check, but that everybody in the room, everybody online, God, at the end of these conversations, that we would all actually be richer than we ever could on our own, Lord.